The studio was quiet for just a moment before the director counted down from 3, his hand cutting sharply through the air to signal the start of the live broadcast. Millions of fans across the globe were already flooding the chat rooms, their excitement reaching a fever pitch as the familiar, upbeat intro music began to play through the speakers. Zhang adjusted his collar, flashing his trademark gentle smile toward the glowing camera lens while trying to keep his composure despite the nervous flutter in his chest. Tian Xiwei sat right beside him on the sleek, brightly lit couch, completely unaware of the elaborate plot that had been quietly set into motion behind the scenes. She waved enthusiastically at the chat, her bright laughter filling the room as she read out the fast-moving comments praising their recent drama. Linghe nodded along, offering witty remarks and feeding off the lively energy that Xiwei always seemed to effortlessly bring into every room she entered. The first half of the live stream went smoothly, filled with the usual playful banter, fan Q&A segments, and sweet moments that had social media platforms crashing under the massive wave of trending hashtags. Linghe played his part to perfection, laughing at Xiwei's jokes and gently teasing her about her notorious sweet tooth, keeping up an easygoing facade. However, beneath his calm exterior, his mind was racing, fully aware that the real challenge, and the biggest surprise of the evening, was about to unfold in just a few minutes. The cue for the surprise was scheduled right after the upcoming commercial break, a tight window that required absolute precision from the entire production crew. When the red light on the cameras finally flickered off to signal a brief 2-minute pause, Xiwei stretched her arms lazily and turned to ask Linghe if he wanted some water. Linghe shook his head, offering a mysterious grin that caused Xiwei to narrow her eyes in playful suspicion before turning her attention back to her phone. During the commercial break, the studio manager quietly signaled to Linghe, holding up 2 fingers to indicate they had less than a minute before going back live. Linghe took a deep breath, mentally rehearsing his lines and praying that the prop department had managed to execute everything according to his strict specifications. The hidden crew members backstage held their breath, clutching heavy boxes and adjusting specialized lighting rigs to ensure the dramatic reveal would hit with maximum visual impact. With a sharp nod from the floor director, the cameras flashed back to life, and the broadcast indicator blinked red once more, plunging them straight back into the public eye. Xiwei immediately switched back into her professional, bubbly host persona, leaning toward the microphone to welcome the viewers back from the break with a cheerful greeting. Linghe joined in smoothly, but instead of continuing with the pre-approved script on the teleprompter, he subtly steered the conversation down an entirely different path. "You know," Linghe began, his voice dropping into a softer, more reflective tone that instantly caught Xiwei off guard and made the live chat explode with curiosity. "We've talked a lot about the characters we played, and the journey we shared filming this project, but there is something we haven't spoken about yet." Xiwei blinked, her eyes widening slightly as she turned her head to look at him, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere of the studio. She tried to laugh it off, flashing a quick, charming smile at the camera while nudging Linghe's shoulder with her own to keep things light. "Why are you looking at me like that all of a sudden? You're making it sound like you're about to confess a massive secret," she joked, her voice ringing with amusement. Linghe didn't laugh, instead, his gaze remained steady, locked onto hers with a mixture of warmth and mischievous anticipation that made Xiwei freeze. The comment section was moving so fast now that individual messages blurred into a rushing waterfall of flashing text. "Maybe I am," Linghe whispered back, leaning slightly closer to his microphone as the studio lighting dimmed just a fraction on cue. Before Xiwei could process his words or formulate a witty comeback, the overhead studio speakers suddenly shifted from the background music to the soft, melodic opening notes of a song they both held very dear. Xiwei's breath caught in her throat, her hands flying up to cover her mouth as recognition flashed across her expressive features. The song was an unreleased demo track that they used to listen to on set during long, grueling night shoots, a private inside joke between the two of them. She stared at Linghe in absolute disbelief, her mind struggling to comprehend how he had managed to secure the rights to play it live on a major broadcasting platform. Linghe watched her reaction closely, a tender smile breaking across his face as he saw the genuine shock ripple through her system. "Linghe, are you crazy?" she hissed under her breath, though a brilliant, watery smile was already fighting its way past her hands. The cameras zoomed in tightly on her face, capturing every subtle shift in emotion for the millions of viewers watching at home. Instead of answering her verbal jab, Linghe reached down beside his chair and pulled out a large, beautifully wrapped gift box that had been concealed behind the sofa cushion the entire time. Xiwei let out a loud gasp, her eyes growing wide as saucers as she stared at the enormous box resting on Linghe's lap. "What is that? When did you even get that here?" she stammered, entirely breaking character as her professional composure completely melted away under the weight of the gesture. The live chat was now moving at a speed that literally crashed the server's primary chat window for a brief, chaotic second. Linghe chuckled softly at her flustered state, carefully setting the heavy box down on the small table between them so the camera could get a clear shot of the custom calligraphy written across the lid. "You always said that the hardest part of filming wasn't the long hours or the emotional scenes, but missing the little things we used to do on the weekends," Linghe said, his voice laced with genuine affection. Xiwei looked down at the box, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached out to touch the satin ribbon tied neatly around the center. She remembered mentioning that exact sentiment months ago during a casual conversation in her trailer when they were exhausted from a 20-hour shoot. The fact that Linghe had not only remembered those passing words but had turned them into a grand, public surprise left her momentarily speechless. "Open it," Linghe gently urged, nodding toward the ribbon while flashing an encouraging, boyish grin that made millions of hearts melt across the internet. Xiwei took a shaky breath, pulled at the bow, and lifted the lid of the box, only for a cascade of colorful, Polaroid photographs to spill out over the edges. She gasped again, her hands diving into the pile of pictures, her eyes scanning the candid shots of their behind-the-scenes moments that no one outside of their private circle had ever seen. There were pictures of her sleeping in a chair with a script over her face, blurry shots of them laughing hysterically over ruined takes, and quiet snaps of shared meals in the dead of winter. Tears welled up in Shui's eyes, threatening to spill over as she realized the immense sentimental value of every single photograph. Scattered across her lap, "You kept all of these?" she asked softly, her voice thick with emotion as she held up a particularly funny photo of Linghe making a ridiculous face while holding an umbrella over her head. "Of course I did," Linghe replied, his tone turning quiet and earnest, cutting through the noisy studio environment as if they were the only two people left in the world. "Those months were some of the hardest of my career, but you made every single day worth showing up for, and I wanted to make sure you remembered that." The studio crew stood in absolute silence, completely captivated by the raw, unscripted chemistry unfolding right in front of the live cameras. Viewers on social media were already clipping the exact moment, creating thousands of split-screen reactions that flooded every major entertainment portal within seconds. Xiwei wiped a stray tear from her cheek, laughing through her sudden wave of vulnerability as she tried to compose herself for the sake of the broadcast. "You are completely impossible, you know that, right? You always have to be extra," she teased, though her voice trembled with profound gratitude and warmth. Linghe just laughed, leaning back in his seat and looking thoroughly proud of himself for successfully pulling off the elaborate ambush. But just as Xiwei thought the surprise had reached its climax, Linghe reached back into the box and pulled out one final, smaller velvet-covered item hidden at the very bottom. The atmosphere in the room shifted once more, the playful lightness giving way to an intense, magnetic curiosity that gripped everyone watching the screen. Xiwei froze for a second time, her eyes fixed on the small velvet box as Linghe placed it gently right in the center of the table between them. "There's one more thing," Linghe said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a gravity that made the hairs on the back of Shui's neck stand up. She didn't dare breathe, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird as she wondered what else he could possibly have planned for a live audience of millions. The directors backstage were biting their nails, watching the monitor in sheer awe as the broadcast numbers shattered all previous platform records in real time. Linghe slowly unlatched the velvet box, revealing a custom-crafted silver charm bracelet adorned with miniature trinkets that represented every major milestone of their drama. There was a tiny camera, a miniature script book, a tiny coffee cup, and a small star, each piece meticulously detailed and polished to absolute perfection. Xiwei let out a breathless gasp, her hands flying to her face as she stared at the stunning piece of jewelry with undisguised wonder. "Linghe, this is insane. When did you even have time to make this?" she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears as she traced the edge of the box with her fingertips. "I had it designed right after we wrapped principal photography," Linghe admitted with a soft, bashful smile, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted something that would remind you of this chapter of your life whenever you felt overwhelmed or tired on your future sets." Without waiting for further permission, Linghe carefully lifted the bracelet from its velvet bed, picked up Shui's wrist, and gently slid the silver chain over her hand. The metal caught the harsh studio lights, glinting brightly as it settled perfectly against her wrist, fitting her as if it had been measured by a master jeweler. Xiwei stared down at her wrist, completely lost for words, a rare occurrence for an actress known for her sharp wit and quick tongue during press tours. She looked back up at Linghe, her expression a mix of deep fondness, utter shock, and a vulnerability that she rarely showed in front of public cameras. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, though the sensitive studio microphones picked up every single syllable clearly. Linghe smiled warmly, reaching out to give her hand a reassuring squeeze before turning back to address the massive wall of monitors displaying the live chat. "And to everyone watching at home," Linghe said, looking straight into the camera lens with a confident, dazzling expression, "thank you for loving this story as much as we did." The chat was an absolute sea of heart emojis, weeping emojis, and ecstatic messages celebrating the genuine bond between the two co-stars. The director flashed a thumb up from the shadows, signaling that they had just 30 seconds left before the final sign-off of the broadcast. Xiwei shook her head, a brilliant, radiant smile returning to her face as she quickly wiped away the remaining traces of moisture from her eyes. "If you guys thought this live stream was chaotic, just wait until you see the behind-the-scenes footage we're releasing tomorrow," Xiwei announced playfully, fully recovering her composure and leaning back into her professional rhythm. Linghe laughed along, nodding in agreement as he wrapped his arm casually over the back of the couch behind her chair, completing the comfortable picture. The final countdown timer hit 0, and with a cheerful wave from both actors, the studio lights slowly faded to black, bringing the historic broadcast to a close. But even after the cameras stopped rolling and the crew rushed onto the set to pack up the equipment, neither of them moved from their